Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to Free Thought Hour. So as you can see, I've got a guest here tonight. It's Sam McKee, he's a polymath. And, this is very impressive because most of us are specialists. And I've never been a specialist myself, but so it's nice to meet somebody else who's a generalist. But you've taken it to great extremes, Sam. You're doing 2 PhDs. Tell us about that.
Thank you. Firstly, it's a real honor to be here. Thanks very much for the invite, and it's good to speak to you again, John. Yes, so I'm just finishing off my first doctorate. I'm in the final year of that. That's in history and philosophy of science at Manchester Metropolitan University, where I am associate tutor on the philosophy faculty. Even though I'm specializing in philosophy of science, that means I have to teach like Plato and Aristotle and Socrates to the first and second year undergrads and the foundation students. I'm doing a fully funded second doctorate in DNA repair, so cancer genetics at the University of Reading, where I'm in my first year of that. So that's sort of my main area of scientific specialty. I've got, if you add them all up, I've got 9 university qualifications when it'll all be finished, which according to my mum will be in the top 10 in Britain. Which is pretty cool, I guess.
Well, it's truly an honor. Yes, I've only got 2 degrees, so
well, that's one more than most.
yes, indeed. Yeah,
and 2 more than many.
Yes, I never went for the PhD. I couldn't think of a subject worthy of my attention. But there. So the thing is that doing a philosophy of science, you mentioned Aristotle and Plato. Okay, they were sort of early philosophers, bit of logic and stuff, but science didn't really begin then, did it?
Well, it as always with philosophy, you have to define your terms. I credit Aristotle and Democritus and those guys as being the first sort of scientific thinkers, the first people who were genuinely interested in the natural world for its own sake. Rather than just leaning on mythology and saying, there we go, we've got it answered because the gods did it. Aristotle was brilliant in particular. He's by far my favorite out of those. And he did try and sort of systematize study and nature itself. So, but no, I mean, modern science, you're talking sort of Galileo, Copernicus, or 16th, 17th century onwards.
Yeah. Because you said they were scientific thinkers, and I immediately thought, you can only do so much by thinking. What you've got to do is investigate. And I'm not sure that they did a great deal of that in those days.
They were interested. I think Aristotle was deeply interested. I mean, Democritus and the first ideas about the world being made up of atoms. Yes, it was just pure speculation, but looking back, it's pretty remarkable. And we call them atoms, basically.
Thanks to him, yes, the Greek for atomos. Yes, indeed. Yeah. But the real breakthrough was in the Renaissance, wasn't it? When they just decided that you can't always reliably think your way to an explanation or an answer to a mystery. And you've actually got to try and investigate for observations in the natural realm. What would you say to that?
I think we're historically very fortunate that there was an overlapping synthesis at the time. In Europe, you had the Renaissance in the south with the person who I think is the greatest polymath of all time in Da Vinci. But you also had the Reformation in the north, which was breaking the grip of the church.
Yes.
So you had, instead of the just trust authority and what we say the text says and just sit under our control, that was being broken in the north, while the Reformation, while the Renaissance and free thinking and sort of expanding your idea of what a human could achieve was happening in the south. And the fact that they overlapped, I think, is a historical coincidence that we should be grateful for, because I think it doubled the speed of of change.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then there was the Enlightenment. Where does that fit in?
So the Enlightenment, well, again, there's disagreement about when you date this.
Yeah.
I think of the Enlightenment as sort of later 18th, and then accelerating in the 19th centuries. But again, you've got the marriage between the different ways of thinking, the rapid acceleration of education, and the blossoming of universities, which started obviously a long time before that, but there's much greater speed of access of reading and writing, but it's the industrialization as well that's changing. And so you've got these overlapping, these convergences, rapidly accelerating everything.
Yeah, you can't pin it down to a specific date, can you? I mean, some people would argue that the Renaissance happened over a period of about 400 years.
Yeah. And they can make a good case and be right. So my history of science is focused on interwar physics. So my thesis is on some of the lesser known British thinkers of the interwar physics boom. So Einstein's generations. So I'm looking at Sir Arthur Eddington, he's just had his own suburb named after him in Cambridge, finally.
Has he? Yes.
So Eddington now, for all his achievements, he has a Sainsbury's and some student accommodation.
Right. Excellent.
Yeah, what a legacy. Also,
he was one of the first people to come up with some evidence to support relativity, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's the one who proved it. It's a magnificent story. The BBC actually made a little movie about it in 2008 called Einstein and Eddington. Yeah. And David Tennant plays Eddington, and Andy Serkis is a brilliant Einstein. It's worth watching it just for Serkis's Einstein. But Eddington, it's a fantastic story. He is the Plumian Professor of Astronomy at Cambridge University during World War I. And he is essentially sitting in Newton's chair, and if Newton is God in Cambridge. And at that time, there were people saying at the end of the 19th century that physics was complete, and all that you needed to do now was collect data. And Einstein has just taken up a post in Berlin during World War I, and they're both pacifists. They're both against the war, and a group of the Cambridge scientists are asked to basically scout the German scientists. And you talk about historical luck, and we are very, very lucky that Einstein was given to Eddington to scout. And so Eddington is given Einstein's papers on relativity. And he thinks, God, there's something to this. This beyond something. Eddington was one of the few people in the country with the mathematical nous and the imagination to sort of really grapple with it. But he is holding Newton's chair at Cambridge. During World War I, saying to others, I think this German physicist is right and Newton is wrong. This is you're getting in some hot water here. So they start writing to each other through De Sitter in the Netherlands. And they're passing notes and writing to each other through the medium of De Sitter in the Netherlands, which is crazy. And Einstein is very, very open to everything Eddington's saying. And Eddington one of the first things he does is he applies relativity to the orbit of Mercury. Because Mercury is off.
It's always been an embarrassment in Newtonian terms.
I mean, people were positing, because Uranus wasn't quite right, and so people posited Neptune, and then they found it, which is incredible. So people have been positing another planet called Vulcan in between Mercury and the Sun, and never found it. And so people like throwing up their hands. What do we do about this? But Eddington applies Einstein's maths to Mercury, and it solves the problem. The story is that Einstein was dancing in his living room, apparently, when he got this note from Eddington saying that.
I'd love to have been there. Fly on the wall.
Wouldn't it have been great? So Eddington says, we should prove this, and there's a solar eclipse coming up in 1919.
Yes.
And so with the help of Sir Frank Dyson, they convinced Cambridge and then, the British authorities that Eddington shouldn't be sent to the war.
Yeah.
And this is very, very important. But politically, the way they do it is, we will either have proven the new theory of gravity, or we will have proven that Newton is still right and this German scientist is wrong. And that satisfied them. So
yes.
So in 1919, they sailed to Principe Island, tiny island off the coast of Africa, to take photos of an eclipse.
Yes.
And the prediction being that, you apply the maths, the sun's gravity is going to bend starlight. And so the stars around the sun will appear to be off.
And they can move back when the eclipse is over. Yes.
Yeah. And it's incredible. It's still one of the most famous photos in the history of science.
Yeah. It's a lovely story. You're right. Where is that BBC documentary? I want to see that. Can we?
Oh, you can get it on DVD and Amazon and stuff, but you could probably see it for free on YouTube.
I should go look at that and put it in the details underneath this video. Yeah. So it was a cunning sort of diplomatic way of persuading the authorities, wasn't it? We're going to see if we can prove Newton right, which is much more acceptable than we're going to prove him wrong.
Yes. Now, when they have the big unveiling, which, the next day Einstein was world famous. In fact, Niels Bohr always accused Eddington of making Einstein famous. He's like, the reason Einstein is famous and everyone believes everything he says about everything is because of you. And this is incredible because a physicist is a rock star. But when they have the big unveiling, it's in Cambridge under this massive painting of Newton, floor to ceiling size. And Eddington begins the unveiling by looking up at the painting and says, "Forgive us, Sir Isaac, for you are undone." It's so dramatic. I mean, science,
very theatrical. Yes.
Yeah, it really was back then.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's all lovely stuff, and I'm so glad you brought that story to the show. And we're not going to focus too much on your groundbreaking possibilities in genetic treatment of cancer, because I'd like to do that on another occasion. So if you don't mind me inviting you for a future show too.
Delighted. It's biology is very exciting right now. So
yes, indeed, it is. We keep getting little snippets of news in the media, don't we, about new ways of treating cancer based on different methods of waking up the immune system or using genetical substitutions for the errors that have been promulgated. So, but what I was hoping to do with you today, and I was hoping that Tertia would. Tertia, I know you're there.
He's in the chat.
Yes. Listen, Tertia, I've put a link to this in Messenger, so go and click on it and join us. So hopefully Tertia will join us in a minute. So, but I wanted to talk about you in particular because you're a very interesting person. So, how did you get to be the Sam McKee that you are today?
So I was I was born in Northwest London in a very, very poor family, in a very broken family. I mean, dirt poor. I don't really like sort of looking back and talking about my childhood very much. It wasn't great, but one notable thing that happened was my dad took me to the Natural History Museum when I was 6 years old.
Yeah,
and the dinosaurs didn't really do it for me, but what did do it for me was the massive life-size model of the blue whale. Which, if you've ever been to the Natural History Museum in Kensington, you know what it is. You walk in, and 6-year-old me, as with many people, I'm sure, was just staggered by this. And I remember really badgering my dad and the museum attendant, like, what is that? And the museum attendant very kindly, tolerated me and said, "Oh, that's the as the biggest animal there's ever been. I
Mm.
was like, where is it? What does it eat? What do they do? Where
Yeah.
do they travel? How do they live? And then really shocked. I mean, this is sort of 1989, 1990
Yeah.
to here, actually, we don't know, because we've hunted these things to near extinction.
Yes.
Probably
Yes.
only about 2,000 or 3,000 left at the
Yeah.
time.
Yes. That's
Thankfully,
right.
they're having something of a resurgence now. But
Yeah.
I was stunned that you could have something that big, that glorious, and know so little about it at the
Yeah.
time. And that was kind of the birth of me being interested in science. Yeah, I was going down to the library and the school library and just picking up every book I possibly could on whales. I wanted to know everything about everything, and my parents did encourage that. But the
Well,
other big,
they
sorry,
took Dippy out, didn't they, for a while, because in fact, he went on tour, didn't he?
he went
In
on
other
tour. Yeah,
Yes.
I took my daughters to see Dippy on tour in Norwich, where their
Yes.
grandparents were for a little while. So yes, he's on tour doing the rounds. Good for Dippy. Dippy the Diplodocus, for those of you
Yes.
who don't know.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
When I was 7, Helen Sharman became the first British astronaut.
Yes.
Went to the space station Mir, flew for 8 days.
Yes.
And
yes.
then the year after that, Michael Foale, the British-American astronaut, flew on his first space shuttle mission.
Yes.
But Michael Foale in particular, British TV back then was really good. If you're a child, there was Newsround and Blue Peter.
Yes.
And they did give a lot of focus to science. And the space shuttle was flying so often that it was regularly on, the space was regularly on Newsround. But Michael Foale, being a British American astronaut who looked like I imagined I might look like when I grow up and sounded like me, I was really enamored with that. Like, oh gosh, I want to be you. That's what I want to be.
Role model. Yes.
Yeah. And Michael Foale, I mean, he's in the Astronaut Hall of Fame. He flew to space 6 times. He was the first NASA astronaut to spend a year in space. Across his time on his 4 shuttle flights, but also his long duration stay on Mir in 1997, and then his command of the ISS for 6 months in 2004. So I was really gripped by that. He flew in 1992, 1993, 1995, 1997. So I'm growing up with him there. And so 9-year-old me, 9-year-old me was very weird. I memorized the entire London Underground when I was 9. I don't know why a child does that. But
you would be phenomenal on I'm sorry I haven't a clue with the game. What's it called? Named after the tube station. You know what I mean?
Mornington Crescent.
That's the one, Mornington Crescent. Yeah. You would be stunning on that. But Tercia is joining us. Tercia, I'm adding you to the stage. Say hello.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. It was also nice to follow you as a spectator from the other side. But I did feel a little bit jilted, John, because I just had the link to watch the show from the outside. So I thought, okay, is that how things are working from now on? But it's lovely to meet you, Sam. I've been entranced by your story about Einstein and Eddington. And sorry, I'm sort of falling in your soup here, but I want to ask, do I remember it correctly that Einstein's first attempt to prove relativity fell through because of the war, the start of the war?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, good.
And, yeah, there were a couple actually. There was a group of scientists who'd reached out to him to do the exact same experiment. They were going to take a photo of an eclipse, but they got arrested by Russians and had all their equipment confiscated and had to go home sort of with their tail between their legs. So
that's right.
Eddington had the same idea, and obviously it was a very good idea. But it's a great big story. It's a thrilling story in the history of science. Sort of the race to relativity.
But what fascinates, so my background is in literature, and I'm not nearly 1/1,000,000th as smart as you or John, because I do think that the hard sciences tests one's intellectual mettle in another way. But for somebody like me, who my only experience of science and my love of science is because of the history of science, and as an educator, I think more people would perhaps be more interested in science if there was more of the history of science in the school curriculum.
Yeah.
You know, and I just also heard I did miss a little bit where you said that you saw the dippy you saw when you were 7. And I mean, that's another way, obviously, of getting people, young children and children interested in science. But I really do think I teach a little bit of grade 9 science, so it's very junior school, high school science, and I miss the context that the history of science gives one, and stories like the one about these scientists going out into Siberia to test the relativity theory and getting arrested and having soldiers conflict. I mean, there's so many very interesting stories about scientists and how these discoveries are made and how often they're made by accident. So I just love that you talk about the history of science.
Stories are powerful, aren't they? We can all relate to stories.
Yeah, absolutely. But I also want to ask you, memorizing the tube was
so
why? Just because
growing up in northwest London, there was a year or two where I had to get the London Underground to primary school, because we had moved house, but I was still at the original primary school I was in, and so we would have to get the Metropolitan line, just a couple of stops, and like the first flat we lived in for a while when I was a child was directly opposite Ruislip Manor tube station. And so it was just always there, and I don't know why. I was just a weird kid. But by the time I was 9, you could take a blank sheet of paper, put it on the table in front of me, give me the colors, and I'd have the whole thing mapped out with every station in place. I had a very good memory when I was a child. But in terms of sort of the generation why this matters, once I saw Michael Foale doing his thing, I really sort of had a plan. And so again, about 9 or 10, I drew up this plan that I was going to get into a really good grammar school. I was going to do well in the sciences and maths, and then I was going to go to university and do marine biology. But then I was going to go to Oregon State University on the west coast of the USA to do a PhD in marine biology there, because that was the only university on the planet where you could do your PhD in biology studying blue whales. So,
and you did you do that? Did you follow?
No. As plans will be, plans will go awry. But this was my master plan as a 9-10-year-old. Because then I could stay in the USA for a while, become a naturalized citizen, and join NASA as a scientist astronaut. So that was the grand plan. Unfortunately, although I did get into a really good grammar school, shout out to John Hamden Grammar School in High Wycombe. My parents got divorced just before I started grammar school, and it was pretty explosive. And from there things unraveled quite quickly. I did okay at first, but then my GCSEs were a bit of a disappointment. It was a difficult environment. I won't get into it, but then my A levels were explosive. Like my A levels was basically waiting to be toughed out. But I became a Christian when I was 15, and then was in a very fundamentalist environment, and it was very dogmatic. And I was very well loved and cared for by the people at the church. But when you're very starved for attention and you just want acceptance, and you're in a fundamentalist environment where creationism, like young earth creationism, is being shoved down your throat, and the brain is the enemy. In that environment, the intellect is the bad guy. It's all about the heart and the soul, not the mind. And so I had all these people giving me the worst advice ever. Like there were a lot of very well-meaning people and a lot of people who loved me very much, but I was getting the worst advice.
So I want to ask, do you think you were precipitated into the church as a result of the home circumstances, the divorce and the difficulties there?
So No, I kind of, so I hated church as a kid before then. My brother Josh and I would actually have a race to see how quickly we could get kicked out of church, which involved basically a lot of different things. They would bring around these cups of juice in plastic cups, and we would just steal the plastic cups and crack them when the guy was preaching. They would bring around coloring pens and coloring pencils for the kids in wrapped in elastic bands. We'd just steal all the elastic bands and flick them at people when they were singing their worship songs. And they were so patient. I mean, they were really patient with us. We one time, my brother, the best one was we replaced the kids' worship CD with Firestarter by The Prodigy. So they went to put it on. Here we go, kids! And then
Well,
we were laughing. We were laughing our heads off. But
you were really wicked, weren't you?
yeah. I have to give my brother most of the credit for that. But you know, I associated church with not being able to play sport with my friends. Not being able to.
Was this the conservative church, or was this Church of England that you're talking about, where you were so wicked?
What flavor?
That was an independent evangelical Pentecostal church.
Okay.
When I became a Christian, I said to my mum, "No offense, I'm not going to your church. I'm going to find my own." And I found that was a classical old village Pentecostal church that was in style probably a bit more like a Brethren church.
Okay.
So it was Pentecostal in the sense that, you know, the brain was not important, but it was much older. They didn't have any teenagers there. But I became a Christian at 1 o'clock in the morning in the middle of the Easter holidays when I was 15. Sorry, middle of the summer holidays. I'd had a terrible summer of getting ferried between my different parents' houses.
Yes.
Just being miserable, you know, just stay out of the way, and do what you're told and never see your friends.
Yes, horrible.
All that. And
at 1 o'clock though, what happened at 1 o'clock?
Yeah, I had this night where I couldn't get to sleep, and I was thoroughly miserable, and I just thought I'll read something to fall asleep, and I didn't have many books on my shelf at that point beside my PlayStation. So I had a Bible I'd been given when I was born by my grandmother, and I had my name and date of birth inside the front cover. And this is my naivety and how little I know. I thought, well, I'll read the ending first, and if I like the end, I'll read the rest. So I go to the last book. You guys are laughing because I went to the last book of the Bible, the book of Revelation, and spoil the ender. I did not fall asleep. This was the book of Revelation was not the Jesus I knew in Sunday school of riding into Jerusalem on a donkey and being born in a stable. It was all about the end of the world and wild. And I was like, what is this? So I woke my mum and my stepfather up at 3 a.m. and asked them to explain the book of Revelation to me.
Oh, you were popular.
How did that go down?
I think their first thought was, "Oh, go back to bed, you silly teenager." But then it was like, this is a bit different. And so they sat down and talked to me. And obviously, going to a Pentecostal church, and after that, the end of the world is coming in 5 minutes. So you better hurry up and be saved. And because the rapture is going to happen any second. And
but going to sleep.
Yeah. So my interest then very much went to the Bible, and the brain that was memorizing tube stations and the Latin names of whales before then was then memorizing scriptures. Yeah. And in some senses, I look back and I think, oh gosh, if I'd just stayed on track and none of that had happened, maybe I would have gone to Cambridge and then become an astronaut straight away. But you can't say that, and you don't know. Ultimately, I went from being a very depressed, sad child to having a lot of love and support around me, and they were good people, and people who still love me and love my kids to this day. And my mum threw herself into her faith after she got divorced, and she met my stepfather, who I have a wonderful relationship with today. I didn't back then. We skip ahead. I was out of home like the second. I agreed to do a gap year with my youth worker because I got horrible A levels. I was predicted AAB and I got CDE. And it was my A level years was tough. It was just a countdown to being out.
Yes.
And when I said I'd do a gap year, I got a bit of grace because my grades hadn't been good.
Yeah.
But during my gap year, it was, you need to go. You're out of here. And both my brothers got kicked out at the first possible opportunity as well.
So are they
when
older than you, or what?
I'm the oldest.
So they were kicked.
Oldest of 3 boys.
No home, or where
My
did they go?
brother ended up moving in with his girlfriend. And my younger brother, I took him in with me when he was out, and sort of tried to wrap him in cotton wool, really. At that point, I was living in a flat with a friend. But no, it was rough. I ended up doing a gap year with my youth worker because he always cared about me and was interested in me.
Yeah.
And I ended up working in youth and community work as a career for a long time, just most of it on a very difficult estate with young people who had stories a bit more like mine.
Yeah.
And all the science and all the academia and all of that, obviously I hadn't gone to uni.
No.
But I met my wife when I was 22, and we got married when I was 24, and we've been married for 17 years.
Did you meet her through the church?
So actually, I first met her when I was 9 and she was 6. It wasn't love at first sight. But it was one of those things that when we got together, everyone was like, we always knew you two would get together. She went to Wickham High School, the all-girls grammar school over the road from mine. So we'd run in similar circles.
Yeah.
I think I got to sorry. Before my daughters were born, my wife and I went out to Australia for a while, where she's got family, and they were really selling us on emigrating, and we were in Melbourne with her godfather, and we were in Sydney with her auntie, uncle, and cousins. We spent a week in the Barrier Reef. It's just time to think and reflect.
Yeah.
But when we were in Melbourne, and the red carpet is being rolled out. Oh, you should move here. My wife is really smart. She's better than me at everything. And she's very, very smart. She's a head of philosophy and religious studies at this private all-girls school in Oxford. And her godfather, while we're having dinner, just says, "Oh, Naomi, if you guys move to Australia, they would bite your hand off straight away with your qualifications and your experience." And he didn't mean to. And, it's one of the best things that ever happened to me. But he turned to me and went, "And Sam, they'll figure it out, And I was always a byword in my family, like a shame story, because I was a kid who was going to do really well.
We want a woman, but you're also ran.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just suddenly I wasn't offended. I just thought, he's right.
Yes.
Why the heck could Australia want me?
Yes.
And I've been a point of shame and embarrassment in my family for having a lot of potential and it not going anywhere.
Yes.
There. And I remember particularly the week we were out in the Barrier Reef, just going like, this is not right. This was not my story. I'm like a victim here. I'm a sad story of what could have been.
Yeah.
But I'm still young. Like that's not going to be my story from now on. And I went particularly my twins were born the next year, and I really thought. Then I turned 30, and I thought, this isn't going to happen. So I drew up a 10-year plan, to turn my life around. And I had been, when I was a youth worker, I was working for a church, and they'd been sponsoring me to do a theology degree, but I wasn't interested in it, and I didn't take it seriously. But I had left that job without having done the final year. So I had the first 2 years of a theology degree, and then I had 3 rubbish A levels, and that was it.
Yeah.
I drew up a 10-year plan to turn my life around. And it involved finishing that degree, doing a science degree like I always wanted, doing 2 A levels I wish I'd done and fixing my rubbish ones.
Yeah.
And then doing a master's degree of some kind. And then I had put there actually on the original, do a PhD in history and philosophy of science. Because I've been reading some of it for fun. And I thought, I'll do that. But I took it to 3 much older friends who were kind of mentors in the church world.
Mm.
And the first one said, "I don't think this is really you." And the second one said, "I think you should do something easier. Do philosophy." And another person said, "Oh, well, that's cool, but maybe you're setting your sights too high." And I just thought, forget you guys. I'm gonna prove wrong. The only person who
That's
really
more likely to goad you into doing something good.
Yeah, maybe, but the only person who really was 100%, yeah, I'm behind you, was my wife.
Mm.
So I someone very kindly sponsored me to finish the final year of my theology degree. And I enjoyed that because now I was taking it seriously, and I just did everything on science and religion, basically.
Right.
In fact, I did my dissertation defending theistic evolution to charismatic Pentecostal evangelicals, which was quite an experience. But then I did.
Just clear up. Theistic evolution is God gave it a kickstart, and then evolution took over.
Yeah, it's basically you believe in God and evolution.
Yeah.
And you synthesize that, and you sort of you examine that. And I
grew up in that belief, so that's I'm very familiar with that doctrine, and I always thought that we were a little bit smarter than the guys that didn't accept evolution.
Yeah. Well, the creationists routinely tell me I'm going to hell these days, so
yes.
But they, and if you know anything about me, the creationists and the intelligent design people don't like me very much, but that's okay. I kind of wear it as a badge of honor.
Really?
But I did 2 A levels I wanted to do to sort of fix them. It ended up I didn't need to do that because I then parlayed that into getting into Cambridge. So I went to Cambridge as a mature student, and I did. I was going to be doing evolutionary biology as my first module in the natural sciences, but about 3 or 4 weeks before term started, because I was lumped in with all the international students, I got a message saying, "We don't have enough students to run this course in the first term. Would you mind if we switch you to genetics?" And I knew I'd have to do some genetics anyway, and so I said, yeah, that's fine. And so I landed day 1 to study genetics at Cambridge, and day 1, minute 1, I fell hard in love with genetics.
Yes.
So, where have you been all my life?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. This is the most wonderful thing I've ever seen or ever experienced. And I knew very little about it, just some of the required reading I dipped into for year 1. But I was sold. I had a brilliant professor, Professor Tom Money, who's now head of, I think he's head of biomedicine now at Cambridge University, professor of biomedicine. His office is just below Charles Darwin's old preserved office. He's at Christ College, and he's incredible, and I owe him a great deal. So I from then on, like, everything was about genetics. I had the opportunity with my theology degree to do a master's. And so I stayed on and double dipped, because I was always, from then on, for my whole life, really, all throughout my 30s, I was studying 2 degrees at the same time as part of this 10-year plan, and part-time, obviously. But I did a research master's in theology, but it was entirely science and religion, and it was completely on Arthur Eddington, because I'd discovered Eddington at that point, and he's a Quaker. He's a Quaker, so it's very different.
He's a what?
A Quaker.
Oh, okay.
You know the Quakers?
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that I didn't mishear. They were. Was it? Which was the other very famous scientist who was also a Quaker? There's
quite a few of them. So Fred. Yeah, not many people know this, but Fred Sanger was a Quaker who won 2 Nobel Prizes in 1958 and in 1980. Now, he wasn't open about his faith. I don't know that he really practiced it very seriously, but he was a Quaker. They just have a different approach because they're not dogmatic. They're against dogma.
Yeah, open-minded.
They're very creative, very open-minded, very creative. They just have a completely different attitude. So Quakers make great scientists, and Eddington's held up as like the prototypical Quaker scientist. So I did a research master's in science and religion at that was University of Chester. I finished Cambridge. I got a first, and I did my CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing was really becoming famous and like a poignant area of research at that point. So I did my my dissertation on applying CRISPR-Cas9 to try and find some therapeutic solutions to the very aggressive oncogene that when you turn it on and it can't be turned off causes non-small cell lung cancer. So,
can you, for our audience, can you just give a brief outline of CRISPR?
Yeah, so CRISPR, if you haven't heard of it, I mean, you will. I mean, you're hearing about it now, obviously, but CRISPR-Cas9, CRISPR stands for clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. But I guess that's not what really matters. What matters is it's basically a pair of molecular scissors that allows you to cut, copy, and paste DNA and genes. So if you know your genome, the entire body of genetic information, you know, all the letters of your DNA, 3.1 billion of them put together. If you think about that as a row of letters on a word processor, CRISPR allows you to cut, copy, and paste a set of letters very accurately, very cheaply, and very quickly. Cas9 is the cutting tool, so it's CRISPR-Cas9, and Cas9 is we've basically stolen it from the bacterial immune system. People don't know that bacteria have an immune system, but they do. It's CRISPR, and what they do is when they're invaded by a virus, you know, the virus injects its own genetic information into the bacteria to use the bacterial cell as a host to then propagate more viruses. But as that is invading, Cas9 will read the genetic information coming into the cell, and it will snip it, and it basically keeps it like a wanted poster for whenever the virus invades again. It's looking for this set of letters that it's snipped and goes, you blah blah blah, you, I know you've invaded before, cut. And so what Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier, the incredible women who won the Nobel Prize for this in 2020, what they did was they thought, we can use this, we can take this ingenious program called CRISPR-Cas9 and we can use it on anything to cut, copy, and paste DNA, because what it does is it cuts at the points you tell it to, but if you give it a guide RNA is a cousin of DNA. It's a ribonucleic acid instead of deoxyribonucleic acid. You can supply the code you want put in the place. So that's the pasting part. So you can tell CRISPR-Cas9, we want to cut these letters, and then because DNA repair mechanisms, and you know I research DNA repair now, they have this process for repairing a double strand break, but you can hijack that process and supply the guide RNA to say, we want these letters to go in the gap. And it's genius. It's changed the world. It's changed everything about what is possible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we could talk about that more on a biology day, but
good idea. Yes.
I was looking at how you could use that to treat non-small cell lung cancer. And I would love to have done that in the lab, but unfortunately the pandemic hit and Cambridge was one of the first universities to close its doors. So I had to do the whole thing from home and didn't get to actually go in the lab and do that. Because of the pandemic, then, you know, I wanted to continue my studies, but you had to be able to do it distance learning. So I found, I was very interested in molecular biology at that point. So I went to Birkbeck and did a master's in molecular biology at Birkbeck, which you could do completely online. But thankfully, when the pandemic was over, I was able to go in there. And Birkbeck has this incredible underground lab that it shares with UCL. And it's they spent a ton of money insulating it from all the resonance caused by the London Underground. So it's a first-rate, one of the best labs in Britain for molecular biology.
So Sam, what exactly does one study when one studies molecular biology? Do you look at cells? Do you look at Okay, molecules, but what molecules? What?
Yeah.
I'll not pretend to be the ignorant person. I'll just be the ignorant person here.
That's okay.
What exactly does one study when one studies molecular biology?
So, I mean, the cynical person can say it's exactly the same as biochemistry. The chemists are like, molecular biology is just biochemistry. You don't want to call it chemistry, but you're studying, the cellular processes, the genetic processes of macromolecules, so DNA, RNA, and proteins. But with molecular biology, you're studying proteins a lot more. And I felt like for my undergrad, I've done DNA and RNA a lot, and I wanted to study proteins. So I was doing structural molecular biology. So in structural molecular biology, the shape of the macromolecule is what really matters. And that's in terms of health, that's what it really, really does matter. The shape is the most important thing.
Does that have to do with, I know that protein, how they fold? They fold in different strands, and what determines how it's folded determines what it does. Is that sort of?
Yeah, that was a massive part of it, and that's a huge part of what I do now. So the tried and tested methods for finding out a shape. If you want to essentially take a photo of a macromolecule, you've got X-ray crystallography, which was the first sort of really famous method used to try and take a snapshot of what what a macromolecule looks like. At Birkbeck, they had really gotten into cryo-electron microscopy, and the Nobel Prize was awarded for that in 2017. So that was really hot when I was there.
Cryo was hot.
Yeah. You also have nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, other famous ones, but at Birkbeck it was really crystallography and cryo-electron microscopy. But the computational methods were really beginning to take over, and I was really lucky because have you heard of AlphaFold?
I have.
Yeah,
that's the it's the supercomputers that they use to because they use simulations and they calculate all these ways, and they use supercomputers. Is that sort of it?
Yeah, it's the protein folding problem that you mentioned earlier. Scientists, for as long as we've been dealing with macromolecules, have been like, how do you get from the letters of DNA to that being you're copied into RNA and then ferried out of the nucleus to the ribosome, and then it runs through the ribosome and turns into this protein that's exactly the shape it needs to be. How do you get from the code to the shape? How does it know? Because we just couldn't figure that out. And there's very little intermediary. It just sort of seems to happen almost instantly. How does it know what shape to take? Because the shape is so important. Proteins, they're like snowflakes. I love telling kids this, in schools. They're like snowflakes. They're all different shapes. Just like a snowflake is all every different shape. Like they're biology snowflakes, but they're also like keys. The shape is really, really important. If it's the wrong shape, it's not going to do its job. So the structure is really, really important. If you know the structure, you can make the right drugs. You can understand like why it's causing these problems. Structure determines function. That's a law of molecular biology. I also think it's a law of life. But so you need to find out the shape, and what there's a competition, one of the fiercest competitions in biology, held every 2 years, called CASP, CASP, and it's been running biannually. They just last year had CASP 16. So, and it's a race between different universities and research groups and industry to, if you just given an amino acid sequence, can you through computational methods alone determine to 100% accuracy what the protein structure is going to be? What's the shape?
Yeah. It's all about knowing where various charges and electrons are positioned and attract.
You got a whole load of things to account for.
Yeah, it's a nightmare of a calculation.
Yeah, and up until 4 or 5 years ago, people were generally batting about 50%, and that's actually pretty good. If you're nailing half of it, or half the time you're getting it right, you're doing okay. But Google's DeepMind AI engine entered competition 2 casps ago, well, 3 casps ago now, because the last one was in December. And they immediately hit 80%. They were doubling a lot of the competition with AlphaFold, their program. And people were like, what? What is this? What is going on? And then 2 years later, AlphaFold 2 hit 88%. Oh my gosh, it's going to hit 100%. And what are we going to do when you crack 100%? And it was using all this data.
Home.
Well, imagine if you never had to go into the lab to figure out the structure. And you could, through computational methods alone, find out exactly what was wrong or exactly what drug you need.
Is it doing this through trying out all the different variables and doing it so fast that it finds one that clicks? Is that basically how it works?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a computer scientist, so I know what AlphaFold does, but I don't know much about how it does it. We did do a module on it, but a lot of it was way over my head. A lot of it's machine learning, but a huge part of it is gene sequencing is so cheap and fast now that we've got so much data. So AlphaFold can draw on all this data, and it can draw on statistics and patterns, and basically use a huge wealth of what we already know to say, with a high degree of probability, it's going to be this, even though we don't understand how or why it's likely to be this.
That's the frightening thing, isn't it? The computer knows, but we don't know how it's doing it.
It can just predict a lot better. So
just to interrupt you a minute, Sam, before we pack up this show, because we've got less than 10 minutes to run now.
Oh gosh, okay.
So interesting that the time has flown. But I just want to get back to your Christianity, your historic Christianity, because what you've been learning must be giving it a severe bashing, I would have thought. I mean, the fact that creationism is well kicked out of the picture, isn't it?
That went a while ago.
I was going to ask, because I sometimes get confused about our guests. And are you still a Christian? You still a believer?
Yes, I am. But my faith did take a bashing. It took a lot more of a bashing at the hands of the church than any intellectual stuff. I hadn't even heard.
I'm laughing because that is not uncommon. As a former Christian,
I realize that.
As a former Christian, I find it very deeply ironic that it was revelation that converted you, because it was reading the scriptures that deconverted me.
No, I mean, everyone's got their own journey. I think the fact that I was so saturated in fundamentalism, I mean, after that, I guess you could call me Anglican by marriage, because both my in-laws are vicars. And so I was at a sort of an Anglican church plant that was a lot more contemporary. And I worked for the church. I worked in ministry for a long time with young people. I wasn't really doing much on a Sunday morning. I was always with the teenagers. That had been, as I've already said, that had sort of been my journey from what my childhood had been like. But once I was studying, it was clear, I want to head towards a scientific academic career. And after I finished at Birkbeck, I got my funded PhD at the University of Reading, which I'm in now. After during the pandemic, as soon as I finished that Science and Religion Masters, I started my PhD at Manchester Metropolitan in History and Philosophy of Science. So I was essentially an academic then, but I was still doing a ministry job to pay the bills, and I enjoyed it. I always enjoyed working in the community. I always enjoyed working with young people, working with schools. But I won't get into the details of it, and we don't have time. But I had a really terrible experience with church that really smashed my faith. It wasn't the intellectual stuff. Although apologetics is a complicated thing, and I don't particularly like it very much. Once I got into academia and was in my science place, my loyalty is to truth. My loyalty is to reality, and everything else you have to hold very loosely.
Yeah, now that's interesting, because it sounds to me as though you're adopting the non-overlapping magisteria solution to having these diametrically opposed belief systems in your head. Is that right?
Yeah, I think, with all due respect to Stephen Jay Gould, who's a legend, I think it's a little too simplistic. Because there are a lot of things that religion talks about that I think you can find a perfectly reasonable scientific explanation for, and then there are certainly things that belong to physics and only physics and nowhere else, and so on and so forth. But I like the dialogue model. I really don't like the integration model, and the idea that they're completely separate, I think, is a conversation stopper. That's over there, and we don't need to talk about it anymore. And I don't like that. Let's keep pressing. I love Sherlock Holmes. He says, "Data, data, data. I can't make bricks without clay."
Yeah.
And Sherlock Holmes is always a good quote mine for discussion.
He was very keen on abductive reasoning, which is not necessarily the best of the options available.
No, not always. But to really answer your question, I went through a process of deconstruction, which I'm sure you've heard of. But I found it very cynical and unsatisfying. And Alex O'Connor, who one of the more famous atheists online, I met him a few times, and I remember we were having a lunch, and he said, "You can't force yourself to believe." And I thought, well, that's interesting, because you can't force yourself to unbelieve either. And when I was going through my deconstruction, I didn't go to church for a long time. And church was not, I was so anxious and so unhappy and unsettled about it. I would either just sit in creche with my youngest, who was a baby, and not talk to anyone.
Yes.
Or I would drop my children off for my wife, and without my children seeing, I would just go for a walk and come back later, because I didn't want to influence them one way or another.
You didn't teach your children in creche to steal the rubber bands and flick them at each other?
No, I didn't. But my heart had left the religion, but my brain hadn't, because my brain still thought this is the best answer, and there's still there. I think even though church had battered me, there were still wonderful people, wonderful Christian people, who meant I couldn't just go, "Oh, all Christians, they're like this. Oh, all church people, they're all like this."
Generalizing is always a bad idea, I think. But there's also in the same church, there's also some less than wonderful people.
Of course, and that was what had happened. I'd taken the biggest possible punch to the face from church, and I felt like the world of church had turned its back on me.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, what saved my faith and to be honest, my life as well, because I was so depressed at that point. That was the worst year of my life. I was really cratering. I couldn't work for the better part of a year, so we were losing money, and we nearly lost our house. It was a long, terrible story. But I had a thoroughly miserable Christmas, where I felt deeply ashamed of the fact that I couldn't sort myself out and find a job and earn the money I needed. I was getting all these interviews, obviously, because I was a Cambridge person. But then I was always fumbling interview after interview. And the thing was, I applied for a whole bunch of Christian jobs, and no one would hire me despite my track record. So I felt the church doubly abandoning me. But I went in January. I went to Cambridge for an intensive day of lectures, and we ended up having a lab session, because the very eccentric professor was like, "It's never real science unless you're doing a practical."
Yes.
So our whole lecture theatre had benches on, and I had a I can't call it anything other than a religious experience in the lab while I was studying these algae. And I've been through tons of therapy, and I've talked to everyone under the sun. I've tried to argue my way out of everything, but I just had an experience I can't explain in the lab. Now, was it of the risen Jesus Christ? No. Was it of was it of, was it a vision from heaven? No, nothing like that. I just had, it's very hard to explain. I was just studying my algae, and I had a very physical, profound experience that was very invasive, very tangible, not something going on in my head. And it was quite frightening by the end, because when it lasted about 30 or 40 seconds, which is not a short amount of time.
Oh.
Enough time for me to go, something is happening here and I'm living it right now. What is going on?
Yes.
About 30 or 40 seconds later, I come back from my microscope, looking at my algae, and I looked around and everyone else was fine. No one else was experiencing anything.
Yeah.
And that then was quite frightening. And I thought, gosh, something has just happened, and happened to only me.
Right.
So I went and I cried in the toilets for about 15 minutes, but I drove home different. There was a weight off my shoulders. I did not then immediately go, oh, all my beliefs are justified, because I was still in deconstruction. But firstly, it saved my life, because, up until then, I'd been really having these horrible feelings of basically throwing myself off a motorway bridge.
Really? Suicidal?
But, yeah. And that's frightening, because you're not thinking that. It's invading your head, and that's terrible. So I'm eternally grateful for that. But my faith changed shape. I take a lot of consolation from Eddington, who's a Quaker. I really like his writing and thinking. I still take great consolation from people like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. I'm much more at home these days in a church where there's a lot of symbolism and quiet, which is a universe different from teenage Sam. I like candles. I like hymns I like liturgy.
Right.
I like symbolism. I like quiet. I like to just put the world away and focus and be silent and meditate within. And there's a lot I hold loosely. And but that's just the way I operate in the lab, in the university, and everywhere. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
I would love to unpack those ideas.
Well, unfortunately,
with you at some future time, but not tonight.
It is Free Thought Hour, as you know, Tercia, and yes, we've already booked Sam for at least one, maybe two more sessions, because he is fascinating, isn't he?
Absolutely. And of course, I'm extremely envious, because I've been following Alex O'Connor since he began as a youngster. Well, he's a youngster compared to me, but I find the work that he's done, I just find it fascinating, and I love his approach. So although I'm very open and outspoken atheist, I resonate with many of the even with what you've said now. If that was religion, about what you said, you like the ritual, you enjoy the
it's for another time.
Okay, John. I was just saying, I'm very envious that Sam has met Alex O'Connor. You've also one of my
not only have I met Alex, but he wrote the foreword for one of my books.
Yes.
Anyway, listen, I'm sorry. I've tried to make you an outro, Sam. At the end of the show, normally as the names go up through the screen, and it won't upload into my software. So I'm going to have to play the outro, which doesn't have your name going past.
But Sam, it was lovely to meet you, and
yes, lovely to meet you.
I'm looking forward to future chats, especially some more, to hear some more about your tales of the history of science, and I love those kinds of things. It's brilliant, and I'm going to look for that video that you mentioned about Eddington and Einstein. If I Google, I'll just try that on YouTube.
It'll be on YouTube. Can I? Yeah, I would love to chat philosophy of science with you sometime. Would love to chat biology with you sometime.
Great.
But,
do it. Yes.
If I can just mention, I only 3 weeks ago started my own YouTube channel called the Polymath World channel, where because I'm lucky and I get to spend a lot of time with everything from astronauts to scientists and professors everywhere. I just interviewed them and find out about their research. So you can check out the Polymath World channel.
Polymath World. channel. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I had the pleasure of interviewing a NASA astronaut friend of mine yesterday, and also one of the greatest rocket scientists who ever lived, Dr. Robert Zubrin. Just spoke to him on Wednesday. So it's amazing people changing the world who you may or may not have heard of. So.
Yeah. So
Brilliant.
there's Visit the Polymath World, the channel. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
It's been wonderful. I can't wait for the next one.
Thank you, Sam.
Anytime.
Thank you, John.
See you soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, we want to break free. Yeah, we want to break free.
Well, that was the wrong outro. What I was trying to play was this one. I just can't get it right, can I? Never mind. I'll edit that bit. And when it's uploaded.
Sorry for being late, John, but I only got the link. You sent the link to the YouTube, and I was watching it, and I kept on checking my WhatsApp.
Yeah, I was in Messenger. My computer now doesn't like WhatsApp. It's too old for WhatsApp.
Okay, because I was on my post way ahead of time, and so I'm glad I made it eventually, because
You did.
I even put on my makeup for you guys.
Well, you are the eye candy.
Well, when Sam, it was so interesting. I'm always a little bit astounded when I speak to proper scientists, because